Yeah, we're recording. So, I got reached out quite a few times asking about how do we guys do research here at the Daily Brief. So, some context. I work for Zerodha and we run this channel called Markets by Zerodha. And within Markets by Zerodha, we have multiple shows that we are running. The most successful one so far has been the Daily Brief, which is a daily podcast that we shoot. We've done over 170 episodes. We also run it as a newsletter and have a separate YouTube video sent out as well and a podcast. So far that video, that asset has been the most successful one, and people have always reached out in comments asking ki, how do you guys do it, like what's the process like, and no reason for us to gatekeep any of this, and therefore I decided I might as well record this video wherein I share what I learned about the process. And what fascinated me the most is the fact the process here is so research focused that you end up getting so better at learning new things, especially finance and economics, and that it stays with you as well because you're also writing. So, this is a very unstructured and fuzzy way of explaining what we do. Honestly, I'd write a post, but I'm just too lazy, and I thought I might as well just wing it with this video. So yeah, let's start. So what it's like is ki this video, the the podcast that we shoot and the research that we do it for a day in advance. So let's say आज Monday है, we'll do all the research and do all the shooting for Tuesday. That's how this process goes. So this is a 24-hour cycle through which we operate and run the research for the show. So the whole process starts at 7 a.m. in the morning. So that's when uh, we guys wake up, and as soon as we wake up, we start going through everything that has happened during the last day or overnight. We just start looking for developments. So basically this first step of our process is scouting process. This goes from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. उस 7 से 11 के पीरियड में we go through every possible resource that we can get our hands on and try to cover as much width with respect to the types of sources we go to, with respect to choice of topics that we want to cover, because in the end the Daily Brief is a daily news show and we don't want to limit ourselves to just few things that we are good at. So let's say if I like to believe I'm good at banking, I can't talk about banking all the days, but at the same time I also don't want to go outside my area of expertise in a manner where I'm just speaking things for the sake of it and I have no research to back it up. With that said, 7 to 11 is that period जब हम बहुत ज़्यादा वाइड एरियाज में जाके we look for good meaty content that we can start researching on. Now during this process we go from everywhere. We start with Indian news channels, Indian न्यूज साइट्स, फिर वो ET हो गया, मनी कंट्रोल हो गया, हिंदू, बिजनेस लाइन, एनीथिंग फॉर दैट मैटर. वहाँ पे हम देखते हैं हम क्या स्टोरी कवर कर सकते हैं. एंड व्हाट वी आर लुकिंग फॉर इज एनीथिंग रिलेटेड टू इकोनॉमी, फाइनेंस और एनीथिंग रिलेटेड टू द इंडियन मार्केट्स. उसके बाद वी ऑल्सो गो थ्रू ऑल द फॉरेन न्यूज़ assets. This could be, let's say, Financial Times, Reuters, S&P, all of that. एक बार वो हो गया, then we look for even more obscure places on the internet. तो हम RBI की वेबसाइट चेक करेंगे, सेबी की वेबसाइट चेक करेंगे, IMF ने कुछ डाला है कि नहीं, वर्ल्ड बैंक ने कुछ डाला है कि नहीं, देन हार्वर्ड के जर्नल्स में कोई उन्होंने नई रिसर्च की है कि नहीं. बेसिकली वी वांट टू गो टू एवरी पॉसिबल लिंक जहाँ पे नॉर्मल लोग इन द नॉर्मल डे नहीं जाएंगे, बिकॉज once we have access to those links and we, let's say, present them in our research, it gives them a new flavor of understanding things जो otherwise traditional media cover नहीं करता. So I think that's also a USP that we have, the breadth of areas, the breadth of sources that we go out looking for scouting for all these links. So I have my list here ready, around 40 odd links हैं. So इसके साथ साथ ब्रोकरेज हाउसेस भी हर रोज़ अपनी रिसर्च पुश आउट करते हैं. सो ICICI, बॉब कैप, लाइक एनीथिंग फॉर दैट मैटर, हम सबके रिसर्च रिपोर्ट्स को स्किम थ्रू करेंगे. Now between that 7 to 11, it's 4 or 5 of us, we do all of this. The thing is ki when we're looking at, let's say, these 40 odd links, at least that's what my repository looks like. I'm pretty sure my colleagues have a different repository and overlap bhi hoga. We don't go through everything that we come across, we skim through it. And I think that's a skill that I've picked up while working here. When I'm, let's say, reading something, I don't need to understand it fully to know whether that's relevant for me. So that's very important because it teaches me the method of elimination, where I'm eliminating all the possible links which I think are not relevant to me. And this allows me to actually get to the stories that I think should be relevant. Because until you have that process of elimination, you'll never actually get to the point where you know that's the thing that you want to do. So that's very important. Why? Because I used to get overwhelmed कि अगर मैं let's say कोई एक मनी कंट्रोल ही खोल लूँ, पिछले एक दिन में 100 न्यूज़ आर्टिकल्स होंगे, all of them which might seem relevant. I can't go through, read them all. I have to skim through them. Now, this is a skill I think people would have gotten early on in their career, but I have recently learned this, where I skim through it and I skim through it fast enough to know ये relevant है, ये relevant नहीं है. So this process of elimination is very important, especially when you're going as wide as हम World Bank की reports भी पढ़ रहे हैं and साथ में हम money control के जो news आ रही है वो भी देख रहे हैं. So we do that between 7 to 11, and while we are doing that, if you find anything interesting, we start a thread, a morning thread. Today is 21st Feb, so 21st Feb daily thread will start. Everybody in the team will start posting links there कि ये relevant है, ये relevant है, ये हुआ, ये हुआ, ये हुआ. We can talk about this. By the time 11 हमारी meeting होती है. By that time, everyone has collated a bunch of stories that they think are relevant. Now 11 to 11:30, 11 to 12, we sit down, we discuss कि ये अच्छा लग रहा है, ये नहीं लग रहा है. And that's also the time when we are not only finalizing what stories we'll do in a day, because usually we do 2 to 3 stories. That's also the time when we brainstorm as to, if we've decided a story, what angle will we go for. So यहाँ पे it's usually the senior writers, भुवन हो गए, प्रणव हो गए, all of us sit together and हम brainstorm करते हैं. Okay, let's say आज के लिए हम hospitals के बारे में बात करेंगे. For example, right? Hospitals में how can we connect it to the economy? We look at all possible angles we could explore that would add that masala and that could add that extra angle, extra insight to the stories that we do. That's, I think, is the most relevant part of our daily brief show, because again, we don't just cover news, we add those insights, and I think those insights come with experience in a manner. If I have read about hospitals long enough, I know कौन से aspects हैं अभी जो मुझे cover करने चाहिए. Again, that comes by the virtue of experience. Like fortunately the people that I work with were very experienced in that manner, so कभी उसकी कमी नहीं होती. Also, one thing to highlight here on the previous thing कि when we are scouting, we are actually going for the breadth of information. I want it to be as wide as possible. अभी I'm not talking about depth. अभी हमने research करना start नहीं किया. We're just looking for topics. So I want it to be as wide as possible. मतलब startups के बारे में भी हो सकता है, world economy के बारे में हो सकता है. Which is why our sources also have to be very wide. I think I'm just repeating this point, but I think it's very important because कल को अगर आप अपनी नॉलेज बढ़ाना चाहते हो, बट इफ ऑल यू लुक एट इज 2 to 3 न्यूज साइट्स, आई डोंट थिंक यू आर डूइंग जस्टिस टू योर ओन सेल्फ and sort of quenching your thirst for that intellectual curiosity that you have, if you have any. With that said, हम फिर 11 बजे हमारी मीटिंग शुरू होती है. वी स्टार्ट डिसाइडिंग आज क्या करना है, हम एंगल्स ढूंढते हैं. एंड उस मीटिंग में अगेन दिस इज जस्ट अस कैजुअली टॉकिंग, एंड यहाँ पे दिस कॉन्वर्जेशन इज ऑल्सो वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट बिकॉज everybody is now pitching in. So this is a good discussion that we have. I enjoy that. Then decide हो जाता है कि okay, आज हम let's say 4-5 लोग हैं. Somebody is busy somewhere because everybody is doing other things as well. Somebody has their own show. Our manager, he's involved in almost every other thing out there. So not everybody can write that day. Those who are available to write, they'll decide कि हाँ आज मैं इस पे लिखूंगा, and then we start researching. Now before, तो दिस नाउ कम्स टू द सेकेंड पार्ट. हमने स्काउट कर लिया एंड अब हमें पता लग गया हमने ये बात करनी है. नाउ व्हेन वी स्टार्ट रिसर्चिंग, राइट, वहाँ पे फ्यू थिंग्स दैट आई वांट टू टॉक अबाउट इज ऑब्वियसली द डेप्थ्स दैट वी गो टू. एंड डेप्थ्स में जाने के लिए देयर आर फ्यू थिंग्स दैट वी ट्राई. फर्स्ट इज ऑब्वियसली जस्ट brute brainstorming that we do. When we're looking at the topic, we ask what, why, how, what, why, how, almost every possible angle. So if it's a story about hospitals and कुछ trigger हुआ है, we'll talk about what, why, how, what, why, how enough times for us to get to that one piece of insight that is not being talked about. And that's also the time when we start क्रॉस रेफरेंसिंग ऑल द रिसर्च दैट वी डू. तो अभी एक ट्रिगर लेट से किसी न्यूज़ आर्टिकल का था कि हॉस्पिटल सेक्टर में कुछ हो रहा है, बट लिंकिंग इट टू private equity making investment in hospitals, this happens during this time because when we are asking what, why, how, what, why, we continuously keep on doing that to get us an idea कि हम कौन कौन से angles पकड़ सकते हैं. This is one. Then this is not just the writer doing this but also other people. We also pitch in, if it's my story, let's say Pranav will come help me कि हम ये angles देख सकते हैं, because again he's senior, he comes with experience, वो अपना angle देते हैं. This way we are no more looking at it in a very mono, like in a very, I would say, एक गधे की तरह या फिर एक ही हम डायरेक्शन में नहीं देखते. We get to now look at this story from multiple angles, and I think that's very important. And this is also the time when we use AI a lot. So when we're brainstorming, like my personal brainstorming partner is ChatGPT. I use it heavily. I keep brainstorming with it what I can talk about. I keep asking them questions, and at the same time also if I have an angle I want to explore, I'll, let's say, go to Perplexity, ask it to give me all possible research ever done on this particular thing, and वो मुझे फिर हार्वर्ड की कभी रिसर्च दे देगा, कभी McKinsey की रिपोर्ट दे देगा, and all these academic papers जो NBER में पब्लिश हुए हैं, all of that. So now I not only have, let's say, 10 list of things I want to talk about, I also have 10 different sources from where I can talk about it. This usually happens after we've decided and 11 बजे के बाद हमारी रिसर्च शुरू हो जाती है. Once that is done, now I have a clear idea कि मुझे क्या एंगल्स बात करने हैं, मेरे पास क्या रिसोर्सेज हैं. Then I start writing. Now one very important thing about writing is that writing as an art itself is thinking. Writing is thinking. So I guess I was reading this blog by Paul Graham, and उन्होंने अपनी वेबसाइट में यही बोला था कि the art of writing itself is thinking. When you, it's not that you think and then you write. Is that in the process of writing, do you start thinking about the subject in a manner that it clarifies a lot of gaps that you had in your mind about the knowledge of the subject. And that's very important, because when we start writing, do we start identifying, okay, हम ये भी बात कर सकते हैं, ये भी बात कर सकते हैं, ये भी बात कर सकते हैं. So when we start writing, we do start with an outline in mind. And when I say we, I meant me personally. I start with an outline in mind. Okay, मुझे ये बातें करनी है. But when I start writing, when I actually start typing on my keyboard, I realize कि okay, this is also a thing that I should clarify. This is also a thing. And then this process happens. Now this is a very, very intellectually rewarding process, because now I also explore more areas I should have covered. And during this whole process, I again go back to AI, help them answer some questions. Fortunately, I have access to much smarter people than me, and whenever I'm stuck, I go reach out to them as well. So always keeping my mind open with respect to what angle I'm going for and how I can get access to information about that angle as quickly as possible. Now I could use Google for that, I could use AI for that, or I could call somebody up who I think is an expert. So if I know an analyst in hospital sector, I'll just call them up कि मुझे ये बात करनी है. So this way, now I not only had breadth with respect to topics that we were doing जब हम source कर रहे थे, now when I'm researching up, depth भी आ गई है. And then finally, let's say by 5:30, we're done writing our story. This is usually an 800,000 word story. Again, depends. It can be something small also, maybe nothing much to cover there. Something as long as 1500 words also, but again, it doesn't matter. Once we're done, then we start editing it, and that's where senior writers come in, Pranav, Bhuvan. They edit our story. Obviously, like at least for my stories, they are usually filled with flaws. At least at this, when I started writing, बहुत ज़्यादा गलतियाँ होती थी. Now they have reduced, hopefully. But they start editing, and editing में they're looking for factual accuracies, whether if I'm quoting something, is there any truth to it, the logic that I'm trying to follow throughout even my writing style, how is it? Is it convincing enough? Is it appealing enough? So we do all of that as well. And once it is edited, around 7 edit हो जाता है, then the writing part is done. Now it's time to shoot. That's where our narrator, our host comes in. Usually it's Anurag. Most of the time it's Anurag. And if he's not there, then I fill in or somebody else fills in. And that's when shooting happens. So अभी हमने 2-3 stories लिखी थी. Everybody wrote their story. 2-3 story. We collated it, and now we'll start recording. Before that also, what Anurag does or what I do is I have that story read and then make some changes to it, because that story was written from a perspective of a newsletter. I have to narrate it in a conversational tone. So I do that as well. Make sure कि वो थोड़े बहुत changes कर ले. Again, it's very formality वाला काम है, but हम ये करते हैं. And then we go record. I mean, Anurag goes record, and we are done with the recording. Let's say by 8:30, depends. Now our team is done with their day. Now the editor's patient. We have some extremely hardworking and tenacious editors who start editing that video and they receive it at 8 p.m. 8 बजे उनके पास वीडियो आता है. Overnight they edit. So it's a overnight cycle that they do. They edit, and by morning 6-7 they're done with their edits. That's when they give us the YouTube file, the audio file, and then we upload it. एंड जो हमने कल न्यूज़लेटर लिखा था हमने उसको कोलेट करके एक सबस्टैक के न्यूज़लेटर में फॉर्मेट में डाल दिया, एंड देन वी पुश इट आउट. एंड बाय 7-7:30 वी ट्राई जो हमने कल मेहनत की थी वो आज आपके यूट्यूब, पॉडकास्ट और न्यूज़ ईमेल में यू दैट गेट्स डिलीवर्ड. एंड दैट्स प्रिटी मच हाउ आवर 24-hour cycle works. एंड द नेक्स्ट डे अगेन 7 o'clock और व्हेनेवर द फर्स्ट पर्सन वेक्स अप हम अपने इंटरनल थ्रेड पे शुरू कर देते हैं. ओके, 22nd February daily thread, and then we start posting links again. So this whole process happens over time, and everybody in the team wears multiple hats. In a manner, everybody's sourcing those links also, everybody's writing also one day or the other, everybody also gets to shoot. So almost everyone is also very comfortable facing the camera as well. So in that manner, that's a very oversimplified way of how we work, and I think it's very fascinating. Few key highlights that I want to reiterate before I end the video is again the breadth that we go through, right? That's very important because, and यहाँ पे एक और चीज़ होती है, the more people are involved the better it gets, because again I have certain way of looking for things, my colleague has certain way of looking for things, even social media helps us. Maybe we're scrolling through Twitter or LinkedIn and we come across some really good research, and that sends us down a rabbit hole, and then we come across a piece of content that we think is worth the daily brief, and we try to push it the next day. So the breadth is very important, and I think it comes with virtue of experience only. When I started, मेरे लिए the only source of I guess stories was a couple of Indian news channels that I was covering, but then that breadth eventually expanded as I interacted with my colleagues, and they introduced me to all of these places. Now I look through 40-50 websites every day in the morning, just skim through it as fast as possible to get me that कि okay आज क्या कर सकते हैं, what's interesting today. Then depth is the other part of the research that I think I'm very happy about the way I have progressed here, because depth may be, when we are talking about a story, let's say the first piece of content that we read, we usually हमारा brain सिर्फ उसी angle में चलने लग जाता है. To break away from that, we should challenge everything that we read, and be very critical of it. This way we are able to identify. So let's say hospital के example है, hospitals में average revenue per bed has increased, and they've given some reason कि value added services have increased for them. Why has it increased? एंड ओके इस हॉस्पिटल के लिए हुई है, दूसरे हॉस्पिटल के लिए भी हुई है, व्हाट्स डिफरेंट बिटवीन देयर स्ट्रैटेजी. सो जस्ट बीइंग इंक्विजिटिव अबाउट इट एंड चैलेंजिंग एवरीथिंग दैट यू रीड गिव्स यू, like rather opens a way for you to explore all of these angles that I don't think anybody would have done otherwise, and that is what adds that extra level of insight that we try to capture. Again, this comes from a point of you being inquisitive, and B, even context. Most of the times you're researching a story and you won't have context, and the other person might have, because again by the virtue of experience they've read about this earlier. अगर अब हम कभी भी बैंकिंग स्टोरी कर रहे होते हैं, आई हैव इनफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट बिकॉज आई हैव रेड अबाउट इट लॉन्ग इनफ दैट आई कैन ऐड दैट एक्स्ट्रा पीस ऑफ इनसाइट, और एटलीस्ट whosoever is writing, give them a new direction to look when creating that story. And I think this is what not only adds to me as somebody who's been tracking it, because it just reinforces my learning, but at the same time it also gives the other person a new angle to look at. So yeah, that's pretty much how we do run our show at Markets by Zerodha called The Daily Brief. I didn't expect it to be this long, but yeah, that's what we do. If you have any questions, do let me know. If you like the video, share it. And yeah, so this was a very selfish way for me to just put this out there. and also a very lazy way because I planned on writing it, but I mean, this is a 20-minute video, 20 minutes well invested. Okay, bye.